Carla Reynolds had spent the last 10 years in his home, enjoying the freedom of suburban life without the hassles of a homeowners association. No arbitrary rules dictating the height of his grass, no mandatory monthly fees creeping into his budget, and no overbearing board members policing his every decision. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood he had wanted. So when he retrieved his mail on a crisp autumn morning and saw a thick envelope stamped with the insignia of a law firm he didn't recognize, his first reaction was mild confusion. Probably a misdelivered letter meant for someone else. But the moment he ripped open the envelope and scanned the first few lines, his heart dropped. Notice of foreclosure proceedings. The words practically screamed at him from the page. His heartbeat accelerated as his eyes darted across the legal jargon, searching for clarification. According to the document, he was being sued by the Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association for failure to pay more than $9,000 in unpaid HOA dues. His breath caught in his throat. That couldn't be right. Carla had never owed a single dime to any HOA. In fact, his house wasn't even part of one. That had been one of the biggest reasons he bought this property a decade ago to avoid exactly this kind of nonsense. Yet here it was, black and white, stating that he had neglected his financial obligations, that multiple notices had been sent, which he had never received, and that because of non-payment, the HOA had initiated foreclosure proceedings on his home. His hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. His name, his address, all correct. A chill of dread crept up his spine. This wasn't a simple mistake. This was deliberate. Carla stormed inside, his mind racing. His first instinct was that this had to be some sort of clerical error perhaps. A different Carla Reynolds owed these fees, and their system had simply confused the addresses. That had to be it. But as he sat at his kitchen table, the sinking feeling in his chest deepened. Something about this felt off. His grip tightened around the letter. He needed answers. Immediately, he grabbed his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the document. After 2 rings, a robotic voice greeted him. "Thank you for calling Bell & Grayson, attorneys for Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association. Please hold on." A soft, tinny piano melody hummed through the speaker. Carla's fingers tapped anxiously against the table as his irritation boiled. After what felt like forever, a crisp, detached voice finally spoke. "Bell & Grayson Law Offices. This is Lisa. How may I assist you?" Carla took a steadying breath. "Yeah, I just got a letter saying that Hickory Ridge OA is foreclosing on my house for unpaid fees. But I don't live in Hickory Ridge. I've never paid HOA fees in my life because I was never supposed to." A brief silence, then a long, tired sigh. "Sir, we have documentation stating that your property is within Hickory Ridge's jurisdiction. If you'd like to dispute this claim, you will need to submit a formal response before your court date." Carla's blood boiled. "That's impossible," he snapped. "I've lived here for 10 years. My house was never under HOA control. I was never informed of any change. You can't just decide I owe you money." Lisa's tone remained emotionless. Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association recently updated its charter to include additional properties in the surrounding area. Notices were sent to all newly inducted homeowners. Carla's jaw tightened. "I never got a notice." "If you did not receive one," Lisa replied flatly, "I suggest you take that up with the association board." Carla clenched his fist. "Who do I talk to?" Lisa barely hesitated. "You'll need to contact the Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association directly." Carla ended the call, his entire body humming with rage. He wasn't part of Hickory Ridge. He had never signed a contract agreeing to any HOA regulations. And yet, they were trying to take his home. Carla dialed the number listed for Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association. This time, the phone rang longer. He almost expected it to go to voicemail. Then, just as he was about to hang up, a voice answered. "Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association. This is Robert Harris, HOA President. How may I assist you?" Carla's grip tightened around the phone. "You can start," he said, voice cold, "by explaining why your HOA thinks it has the right to charge me fees for a neighborhood I don't belong to." A long silence, then a low chuckle. "Ah, Mr. Reynolds," Harris said smoothly, his voice dripping with amusement. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I assume you've received our notice?" Carla's stomach twisted. This man had been expecting his call. Carla's voice was like steel. "Yeah, I got your notice. Now explain to me why I'm on the receiving end of a foreclosure lawsuit from an HOA I never signed up for." Harris let out a theatrical sigh. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Hickory Ridge recently expanded its jurisdiction to ensure a more uniform community standard in the surrounding area." Carla's breath came fast and shallow. "You mean to tell me that you just decided my house is now part of your HOA, and now you're trying to steal my home over it?" Harris made a mocking noise, the kind people make when they pretend to be sympathetic but aren't. "I wouldn't put it that way," he said. "The community votes on these changes. It's all perfectly legal." Carla stood so suddenly that his chair nearly toppled over. "Legal, my ass," he snapped. "I never agreed to this. I never signed anything. I will not be paying you a dime." Harris's voice remained silky smooth. "Well, Mr. Reynolds, that's up to the court now, isn't it?" Carla slammed his phone onto the table. His hands were shaking with fury. This wasn't some clerical mistake. This was a scam. And if they thought he was just going to roll over and let them steal his house, they had another thing coming. The investigation begins. Carla spent the next 2 hours scouring property records, zoning laws, and legal documents, anything that might explain how this was even possible. Then he found it. A document filed 6 months ago. Hickory Ridge HOA had submitted an amendment to its governing charter, annexing an entire row of houses that had nothing to do with their community. Carla's home was listed right in the middle. His pulse pounded. HOAs couldn't just expand their reach without consent. The name at the bottom of the amendment? Robert Harris. Carla's stomach turned. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. And Harris was behind it. The truth uncovered. Carla's heart pounded as he continued digging through the records, his eyes scanning each document carefully. His house had been forcibly annexed into the Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association 6 months ago. But the deeper he looked, the clearer it became that his situation was not unique. This wasn't the first time the HOA had done something like this. As he flipped through legal documents and foreclosure records, he came across something even more disturbing. 6 other homes had gone through identical foreclosure processes under Hickory Ridge in the last 2 years. The pattern was eerily similar in every case. The HOA would suddenly claim jurisdiction over a house that was never originally part of their community. The homeowner would be blindsided by unexpected fees, fines, and legal threats. If the homeowner refused to pay or tried to fight back, the foreclosure process would be initiated against them. The house would then be seized at an HOA-controlled auction, and within a few months, it would be resold, often at nearly double its original market value. And the most suspicious part? The buyers of these foreclosed homes were always the same private development firm. Carla's stomach twisted with unease as he cross-referenced the sales records with business filings. The company that had purchased all 6 homes had direct financial ties to Robert Harris, the same man who had smugly told Carla that the court would decide his fate. Carla exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the edge of his desk as the realization settled in. Harris wasn't just the HOA president. He was profiting from the foreclosures. This wasn't about collecting unpaid dues or enforcing community rules. This was a carefully orchestrated scheme to steal homes from unsuspecting owners and flip them for massive profits. This was a fraud, bribery. And now, Carla had just stumbled into the middle of it. The retaliation begins. The very next morning, Carla walked outside, still reeling from what he had uncovered the night before. He needed to clear his head, but as he approached his mailbox, his blood ran cold. A bright orange violation notice was taped to his front door. Carla ripped the paper off and read the bold text at the top. Notice of non-compliance. Below it, a list of supposed infractions was outlined in cold, bureaucratic language. Grass height exceeds HOA regulation limit. Unauthorized trash bin placement. Unregistered vehicle in driveway. Failure to display HOA-compliant mailbox. Carla laughed bitterly, shaking his head as he reread the notice. This was blatant retaliation. His grass was neatly trimmed, His trash bin had been in the same place for 10 years, and the so-called unregistered vehicle was his own truck, parked in his own driveway as it had always been. The Hickory Ridge HOA wasn't even trying to hide what they were doing. They were manufacturing violations out of thin air, stacking them against him in an attempt to pressure him into submission. Carla crumpled the notice in his fist, his jaw tightening with determination. If they wanted to play dirty, he was more than ready to fight back. 2 days later, the retaliation escalated. Carla was working in his garage when he suddenly heard a loud clanking sound from outside. His heart jumped as he rushed out the door, his pulse quickening with unease. The moment he stepped onto his driveway, his stomach dropped. A tow truck was hooking up his truck to its winch, preparing to haul it away. "Hey!" Carla shouted, running toward the tow truck. "What the hell are you doing? That's my truck!" A short, balding man in a cheap security uniform turned to face him, a smug smirk playing on his lips. "Your vehicle is in violation of HOA parking restrictions, sir," he said lazily, handing Carla a slip of paper. Carla snatched the notice out of his hand and scanned it quickly. Z violation. Unauthorized commercial vehicle parked on residential property. Carla felt his temper snap. "This isn't a commercial vehicle. It's my personal truck," he shouted, his voice boiling with fury. The tow driver merely shrugged, his expression indifferent. "Take it up with the HOA," he said, climbing back into the truck. Carla's fists clenched as he watched helplessly while his truck was hauled away, the sound of its tires screeching against the pavement. This wasn't about enforcing rules. This was about making his life a living hell. And Carla had had enough. Time to fight back. Carla stormed back into his house, his pulse raging with adrenaline. This had gone far enough. He needed a legal expert who could fight back against the corrupt tactics of the Hickory Ridge HOA. He picked up his phone and dialed the number of Ethan Caldwell, a lawyer who specialized in homeowner association fraud cases. After 2 rings, a smooth, confident voice answered. "Ethan Caldwell, what can I do for you?" Carla took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed as he launched into an explanation of everything that had happened. By the time he finished speaking, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Caldwell let out a low whistle. "Mr. Reynolds, you just described exactly how these corrupt HOAs operate. I've handled cases like this for years." Carla exhaled, feeling a sliver of relief for the first time in days. "I need to stop them before it's too late," he said, his voice steadier now. Caldwell's tone hardened. "Then, we need to act fast. HOAs thrive on intimidation. They count on homeowners being too afraid to fight back. But if we hit them hard and fast, we might be able to stop them before they gain too much ground." Carla clenched his jaw. "Tell me what to do." 2 days later, the legal battle officially began. Caldwell filed an emergency injunction to freeze the foreclosure process before it could proceed further. By noon that same day, Carla received an email from Robert Harris. The message was short, but its arrogance was unmistakable. "I hope you've reconsidered, Mr. Reynolds. This process can be long and expensive. It would be a shame if you dragged yourself through unnecessary legal costs." Carla stared at the email, a slow smirk forming on his lips. Harris was trying to scare him, but he had just made a critical mistake. Carla wasn't scared. He was angry, and he wasn't backing down. The HOA's big mistake. The very next morning, Carla stepped outside to grab his newspaper, still mentally preparing for the legal battle ahead. But the moment he looked at his yard, his entire body went rigid. His entire front lawn had been completely destroyed. The lush, green grass that he had mowed just a few days ago, gone. His beautiful flower beds, which had been carefully planted over the years, ripped out. His concrete walkway, which led from the driveway to his front door, smashed into rubble. His property had been completely vandalized. His hands clenched into fists as his eyes locked onto a white violation notice stapled to what was left of his mailbox. Unauthorized landscaping. HOA compliance action taken. Carla's chest rose and fell with slow, measured breaths as he fought the blazing fury that surged through him. This wasn't just a warning. This was a deliberate attack. This was criminal. Carla immediately picked up his phone and dialed Caldwell. The moment the lawyer answered, Carla's voice was dangerously calm. "They just destroyed my yard." There was a pause. Then Caldwell spoke, his tone like ice. That was a mistake. The investigation expands. Carla drove straight to the county clerk's office. He met Janet, the same clerk who had helped him before. She frowned as he explained what happened. "HOAs can't just destroy private property," she muttered. "Let me check if they even filed a permit for this." She typed something into her system. After a few moments, her brows furrowed. "There's nothing," she murmured. "No permits for landscaping work on your property." Carla's heart pounded. "Then how the hell are they doing this?" Janet clicked around a little more, then suddenly froze. "Oh." Carla's stomach dropped. "Oh, what?" Janet slowly turned her screen toward him. "There is an updated zoning map from 6 months ago," she said hesitantly. Hickory Ridge filed a land expansion amendment. Carla leaned in. The map had been altered. A red boundary line now looped around his home, connecting it to Hickory Ridge. This isn't legal, right?" Carla asked, his voice tight. Janet hesitated. "Normally no, but if they got approval from the county zoning board." Carla exhaled sharply. "How do I find out if that happened?" Janet sighed. "I can pull zoning board records, but if they pushed this through quietly, they might have done it without a proper hearing." Carla ran a hand through his hair. "And if they did that?" Janet looked him dead in the eyes. "Then they broke the law. The HOA collapses." Carla and Caldwell dug deeper into the county records, determined to find evidence that would completely dismantle the Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association's fraudulent expansion. After hours of searching, they finally found the smoking gun. The zoning expansion that had placed Carla's home under HOA control had never actually been approved by the county. The document stated that Hickory Ridge had officially annexed Carla's home and several others into their jurisdiction. However, when Caldwell examined the paperwork, something was missing. The required approval stamp from the county zoning board was absent. In its place was a single signature. Carla's eyes narrowed as he read the name at the bottom of the form. Robert Harris. Caldwell's voice was sharp with satisfaction. He wasn't authorized to sign this. Carla's pulse quickened with anticipation. "So, he faked it? He forged the expansion?" Caldwell nodded, tapping his finger on the page. Not only did he forge it, but he bypassed every legal step required to make this kind of change. There was no public hearing, no approval process, no city council vote. Carla's fists clenched. That means everything they've done, all these fines, all these foreclosures, they were completely illegal. Caldwell smirked. "Oh, it gets better." He pulled up banking records from a recent financial investigation into county zoning officials. There, in black and white, was a $5,000 deposit made into the personal bank account of a county zoning officer named William Trent. Carla felt his stomach churn with rage. "That's a bribe." "He paid off a county official to approve an illegal expansion." Caldwell's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. And now we can prove it." Carla exhaled, barely able to believe what he was seeing. This wasn't just an overreach by a power-hungry HOA. This was a fraud, bribery. And now, they had undeniable proof. Harris and his corrupt homeowners association were about to go down. The final battle. The next morning, the county commissioner called a special emergency hearing to review Hickory Ridge's fraudulent expansion. Carla and Caldwell arrived early, armed with evidence, ready to present their case. The courtroom was packed. Homeowners who had been cheated by Hickory Ridge filled the seats, whispering amongst themselves, waiting for the hearing to begin. Carla sat at the front, his fingers drumming against the wooden table, heart pounding in anticipation. Then, Robert Harris walked in. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, he did not look smug. His skin was pale, his suit slightly wrinkled, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Carla watched as Harris swallowed hard, his confidence visibly shaken. This time, he knew he was in trouble. The commissioner called the room to order and turned to Harris. "Mr. Harris, do you deny the allegations that you expanded the Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association without legal authorization?" Harris cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "This is a misunderstanding." His voice lacked the arrogance it once held. "The Homeowners Association was merely acting in the best interests of the community," Harris continued, his tone almost pleading. "We wanted to ensure consistency in the area. We didn't intend to do anything improper. The commissioner wasn't buying it. He raised an eyebrow, flipping through the documents Caldwell had submitted. Mr. Harris, the evidence presented today shows clear violations, including fraudulent expansion, falsified approvals, and financial misconduct. Carla watched intently, barely containing his satisfaction. The commissioner leaned forward. Do you deny these charges? Harris opened his mouth to speak. But before he could respond, the doors at the back of the room swung open. 2 sheriff's deputies walked in. A hushed silence fell over the room. One of the deputies stepped forward, his voice firm and commanding. Robert Harris, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. Carla felt his pulse slow, his breath steadying. It was over. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the deputies approached the defense table. Harris's face went white as a sheet. Wait, this is ridiculous, he stammered, trying to stand up. The deputy grabbed his wrist, snapping the handcuffs into place. Carla crossed his arms, watching as Harris was led out of the room in handcuffs. Justice had finally caught up with him. Aftermath. The fall of Hickory Ridge HOA. Over the next several weeks, the entire Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association collapsed. The county revoked their fraudulent expansion, nullifying every bogus fine, every wrongful foreclosure, and every illegal claim they had made against homeowners. The houses that had been stolen through false foreclosures, including the Garveys' home, were returned to their rightful owners. The remaining board members of the HOA resigned in disgrace, unable to escape the scandal that had consumed them. William Trent, the county zoning officer who had accepted the bribe, was fired and charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. And Robert Harris? He now faced multiple felony charges, a mountain of lawsuits, and a financial disaster that would leave him ruined for years to come. Carla wins and sets an example. 3 months later, Carla stood on his front lawn, now fully restored, as Caldwell handed him the final court ruling. The judge had ruled in Carla's favor on every single count. The Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association was ordered to pay over $500,000 in damages, not just to Carla, but to every single homeowner they had targeted. Carla exhaled, the weight of months of stress finally lifting off his shoulders. Feels good, doesn't it? Caldwell said with a satisfied grin. Carla scanned the document once more before looking back at his home, the house he had nearly lost, the house he had fought to protect. Damn right, it does, Carla said, smirking. Because now, Hickory Ridge Homeowners Association was nothing but a cautionary tale. And Carla Reynolds? The man who took them down